Hello and welcome. I'm Chris from Physio Friend and welcome to a Physio Friend 5 video. In this video I'm just going to be talking about stroke, what it is, treatments and most importantly ways to prevent it. So basically a stroke is when there's not enough blood reaching the brain. Now this happens in two distinct ways. You can separate it by ischemic stroke or you can categorize it as a hemorrhagic stroke. Ischemic strokes are more common. They're in 80% of stroke cases, and in 20% of stroke cases you get hemorrhagic stroke. So an ischemic stroke is when the blood vessels become blocked. A hemorrhagic stroke is when the blood vessels burst. Now the cause of an ischemic stroke is by poor eating habits, obesity, which basically what happens is the blood vessels become blocked by fatty deposits in the blood vessels. So over time, the blood vessels become more and more blocked, and at the same time, a person's blood pressure is increasing more and more. At the same time as a person's blood pressure increasing, what basically happens is it leads to a rapid rate and an increased likelihood of fatty deposits blocking the arteries as time goes on. A hemorrhagic stroke can be caused even by things like a car accident where blood vessels, the trauma causes blood vessels to rupture. A hemorrhagic stroke can also be caused by aneurysms in the brain. So aneurysms are areas of weakened vessel walls in the artery, and over time as they become weaker, they can become weaker as one ages, or they can get weaker through poor dietary habits, etc. And as that becomes weakened, it just fills up like a balloon, and eventually when it fills up as a balloon it keeps on growing until it expands, and eventually it can burst. So ways to prevent strokes from occurring is thinking about the diet. Research is basically showing less red meat. Get places and countries where they have a Mediterranean diet, or they have a vegetarian diet, or even a vegan diet. There's a lot of emerging research which is showing that these diets are much more better for people. Another way to prevent a stroke is not smoking. Smoking is not good for the lungs and it is not good for the vessel. Smoking actually causes a hardening of vessels, making them more rigid, making them more prone to develop plaques, etc. So cutting down smoking and not smoking at all is also helpful. Other ways to prevent strokes is exercise. Now exercise is very, very important because exercise helps to improve the circulation. Exercise helps to regulate the heartbeat, keep the cardiac muscles very strong. So exercise also helps to reduce stress, and stress also is another cause of stroke. Exercise also helps to improve one's lung capacity and make their oxygen exchange rate from the blood vessels and the blood cells to the tissues. It actually improves that. So that's another benefit of exercise. So other ways to reduce your risk of stroke is keeping your weight under control. People who are obese or people who are overweight are at more risk of developing a stroke. And also it's just to bear in mind that there are two types of fat. So, there's some people who get the fat throughout all their subcutaneous tissues, all their skin, they just look fat, they look big. And then you've got another type of fat which it's more internal, it's sort of like around the belly region, so a lot of waist fat. That's the fat that people also have to be very mindful of, if they're really serious on reducing their risk of stroke. Most importantly as well is sleeping. sleeping and having adequate sleep is very important for reducing one's risk of a stroke. In sleep, what happens? The cells become, they repair themselves, they heal themselves. The brain also gets rid of toxins during sleeping. So it's also being aware of the quality of sleep. And sometimes you can eat the right food, do the right exercise. But if you ain't sleeping enough, then, it makes life a little bit difficult. So you might remember the NHS advert that was out there, which is still out there actually, which is Think Fast. So these are ways you can detect early symptoms of a stroke. The importance of knowing certain symptoms, which I'll explain, is the longer a stroke goes on untreated, sometimes, well, a lot of the times, the worse the outcome can be. So when we say think fast, it's F for face, A for arms. Can they raise their arm? And importantly, it's best to get them to raise both arms at the same time to see any discrepancies. So the S is a speech slurred, and T is time, because the quicker you can get them to the hospital, the faster they can receive that necessary life-saving treatment, and the quicker their recovery time. Just looking at stroke and the healing towards stroke. So if you think of the brain and an area where there's a lack of blood supply, what happens is regions within that part of the brain start to die. And depending on what part of the brain dies depends on the symptoms. So if you have a stroke which affects the frontal lobe of your brain, which deals with cognition, etc., a person is going to have difficulty with memory. If a person has a stroke in a part of the brain that deals with speech and language, a person is going to have difficulty understanding, comprehending speech, and also finding it difficult to initiate words or word finding difficulties. If it's at the back of the brain, dealing with the visual part of the brain, then the person's going to have visual difficulties. So it really depends on what part of the brain is damaged from the stroke because of lack of oxygen. When you look at the area of the brain that dies, a lot of the time life-saving treatments is not necessarily just to deal with that area, but what you have is parts of the area of the brain not initially affected by the stroke which become damaged because they're like neighboring areas. So a lot of the stroke management is to also make sure that there's a lot of preservation of that area. So when a person goes to hospital, that's initially what they're looking for. So when people talk about recovery from stroke, the word neuroplasticity is also used. The brain does its best efforts to heal itself after stroke. So that may include that new brain cells are being created by the brain, and also new synapses. Synapses meaning connections are also being made within the brain to help restore that previous function. Now the importance of rehabilitation and professions like physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and all the disciplines is to really enable one to start to relearn tasks. So it's not learning it for the first time, but it's relearning, because within a relearning process, basically the brain makes the correct connections. A lot of the times, if a stroke is left without the proper facilitation, without the proper treatment, the brain will make connections, no doubt, but it could be the wrong connections. So it's important that, for example, if a person's reaching for a cup, they're opening their hands for a cup, and they're using their shoulder muscles, their bicep muscles, their wrist muscles, all the muscles in the arm, and they're doing the correct movement. Sometimes that needs to be guided for the correct movement to happen. If that's left untrained, the movement might be wrong, the wrists might be in the wrong position, etc. So it's really relearning things like a child, but the difference is not learning it for the first time. So I hope you liked the video. I hope it was informative. If you like the video, you know, do a little like sign on the Facebook. Most importantly, share it, share the information, you know, because it is there to help people. And yeah, so you can check out the Facebook page at PhysioFriend, and there will be more videos definitely to come. And if anyone out there has any ideas or anything you'd like me to go through, please let me know.